Good afternoon, everybody. This is Matt Kinsman, Head of Content at Connectiv. Thanks again for joining us today for Native Done Right, how to sell fewer ad units and make more money. I think it's safe to say that the majority of listeners today have dabbled with native advertising. According to eMarketer, native makes up more than 50% of the display ad spend in the U.S., while a survey done by Connectiv and a company called Polar found that companion display ads perform twice as well as regular display ads. But it's not just about selling more ads, it's about selling ads that perform. Today we'll hear about the current state of native advertising, best practices for selling native, including how to avoid some of the common pitfalls with native advertising, as well as a case study on how one publisher was able to reduce its display inventory while boosting click-throughs by 77% and CPMs by 248%, thanks to native ads done right. Our speakers today include Phil Hawken, Business Development Manager at Kiplinger, and Cable de Marcelos and Ross Mason of Dinomi, a leading content marketing platform. As a reminder, you can submit questions via the chat tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Just submit those questions, broadcast to all, and we'll also hold a Q&A at the end. With that, Cable and Ross, please take it away.
Hi, here's Ross Mason speaking. So just to make sure you can hear me all right?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, great. So interestingly enough, just to start us off, so I come from a programmatic background. I've been with Dinomi for just over 6 months now. It's very interesting the way that programmatic and native are perceived differently by publishers. In my time here, it's certainly felt far more as being a partnership from a native point of working with the publishers, as opposed to programmatic, where obviously a lot of spread has been trying to achieve at the lowest possible price, and not necessarily working with the publishers to their benefit to ensure that the user experience is what it should be and is key behind what drives native, as opposed to the programmatic side. So if we go to our first slide. So if we look at this, and this is very evident closing off 2017 and going into 2018, is that programmatic display is currently down and native is up. And as alluded in the beginning, there's a good reason for that. And it's the engagement from the audience across publishers based on where the units are. They're far more interactive. They're within the content. They're more around the content. So it drives value and contextually more relevant to what you're reading about, as opposed to big display banners, which still have their place, but it's crucial that in doing native that we do it correctly. What's very important around that as well is obviously the brand safety side, and that you ensure that you're not plagued with the fraud and stuff which has come from the programmatic side, which is very much the focus on how you need to do native correctly, and which is a core behind the way Dinomi delivers their ads in a native format. If we go to the next slide. So this just shows the percentage-wise. So year on year, obviously, there's huge growth in native. 74% up in Q1 2017, which just shows that it's such a big, important place for where we need to be ensuring that we're doing it correctly to make the right revenues. The revenues to the publisher, which is obviously key, is they achieve a higher percentage from a native point of view than they do from programmatic. Programmatic, they're looking at 40% plus, whereas from a native point of view, it's more than the 60% plus, depending on who the integration is with, and a few variables that come into it, whether it's the traffic, the viewability, and all those other elements. If we go to the next slide. So publishers are obviously looking to get more control. There's a couple of ways they're doing that, and primarily it's through native. Another way they can achieve it with what the programmatic space is like is by running in PMPs, where they can obviously be in far better control of the inventory, better control of how the audience is engaging with them, and then at the same time, for the publishers who are looking to obviously increase A, the revenue, and B, the engagement of the audience with their sites, ensuring that the contextually relevant native advertising is in the right place, in the right articles, in the right sections, is certainly key. For instance, there's a quote here from The Guardian. If you look at that, every pound that was spent on advertising, only 30 pence was making its way back to the publisher, which is very evident in the programmatic space. Whereas from a native point of view, you're certainly, from a publisher point of view, achieving higher revenues and a higher percentage, which is obviously key to growing the quality of the content on those publishers, which is so crucial to ensure that the audience is getting that crucial, relevant information that is up to date and of a really high quality, with the right advertisers that are aligned with those brands and those publishers, to ensure that the experience is what it needs to be. So if we go to the next slide. So there is obviously occasions where native is not done so right. So if we look at the slide here, there are other players in the space who these certainly work for them. But if you look at it from especially our point of view, where we focus on the finance and business verticals, these are not ads that you want to be seeing on finance ads. So it's crucial around brand safety and having the contextually relevant ads to ensure that you're getting this higher engagement rate. So if it is for instance, a Kiplinger or a JP Morgan ad on a financial site, and it's relevant to the user based on the articles that they're currently reading, the chances of them obviously clicking on it and engaging with it is far higher, which increases their experience, but also increases the revenue that publisher is generating from doing it and doing it right. So it's crucially important that contextually relevant ads are in the right place at the right time in the customer journey as they're going through that publisher. If we go to the next slide. So we had a quote from one of our other publishers, the Globe and Mail, and so what he was saying is that what they've noticed is that the best practice that every publisher should obviously consider is to understand what it means for you. What that means is, where are the right places to have the ads? There's multiple ways of testing it. It's also around testing which type of ads work best on your site. So a bit further in the presentation, what we'll show you a couple examples where we do A/B testing between image variants, text variants, right-hand rail, in article, below article, and understanding what works for you as a publisher, what works best for the audience, what they engage best with, and then doing it with the premium advertisers from a brand safety point of view, certainly ensures that the experience is what it needs to be. So there is a lot of testing that you need to do, but as you do it and as you work very much in having an actual partnership with the publisher, you test and you learn, and from that you understand what is the best avenue and the best practices for you. And obviously it's a continual partnership. As things obviously change in the industry, you change and you adapt, but that's what the partnership is all about. So if you go to the next slide. So there are obviously some mistakes that do get made, but it's part of the learning process. So whether it's you're targeting the wrong audience, you've got the wrong advertisers, by working with the native ads, and they're able to advise to which advertisers are working best across your site. They're also, like Dynami does, you're able to look at what content is trending across similar publishers to yourselves. So by doing that, you also getting the understanding of what content you should be pushing, creating more of, what quality it should be, and the relevance which is associated with that. Gone are the days where you just put a whole bunch of ads across the site, hope people click on it, and make money from it. It's now about having them in the right place, testing them based on whether it's viewability score or it's time on page. There's many different variables that you need to take into account to ensure that your audience is getting the best possible experience and that they're going to keep coming back. And then in turn with that is growing that audience to ensure that there's sustainability for the publishers. So if we go to the next slide. So some of the most common mistakes which unfortunately are still prevalent at the moment is too many ads. There's a lot of clutter. You'll hear a bit later from Kiplinger how minimizing ads certainly helped them. A lot of mistakes that are commonly done is the type of ad, and for some reason, publishers seem to think that adding ads that are of different color, big, bright, bold colors, are going to perform better. Certainly not the case. It's more that those are the ones which are skipped over and content has gone through. So what's important with native is to ensure that the units look like they belong there. They're part of the site. They're an extension to that publisher. You're providing content which is obviously relevant and will help the audience engage further with it. It's important that it's, again, in the right places, and that it's not those clickbait images which are there just to get clicks and make you revenue, because it's certainly not the way that your audience wants to experience being on your site. So what is key, and there's obviously a couple things here, and we'll illustrate them with images. So the fonts, ensure you're using the same fonts as the site so that it blends in with the site, ensures that the look and feel is what it needs to be. You need to ensure that sponsored content is also clearly labeled. It needs to have its place on the site outside of where display obviously is. What's really important is the A/B testing of units. So if we go to the next slide. So here you can see a good example of a text variant at the top versus a 6-image variant below. On some of our publishers, surprisingly, you'll find that the text variant outperforms the image variant by a considerable amount, 25 to 30% higher revenue. But then again, it all does come down to who the publisher is, how the audience obviously engage with them. There are other publishers where it's the other way around. But what's key is that A/B testing, several variants, find out what works best, and then obviously do more of what works, because that's what we obviously, the service that Dynamo provides is to ensure that the revenue and the experience for the users is what it needs to be. So if we go back one slide. So that's obviously a key factor. Another factor is, there'll be two, and then we'll go on to them. So one is obviously the smaller number of bigger units, and then the use of the below article and in article positions to maximize performance. So if we go 2 slides forward. So for instance, what we're doing quite a lot of A/B testing from our side at the moment, and it's certainly proving its dividends, is these ads take up the same space. The top unit obviously has 6 ads. Image isn't as engaging, can't quite make it out quite as well as the 4 large images. Generally, we're seeing about a 15 to 20, 25% uptake in revenue and engagement with the larger images. So fewer amount, larger images, clearer, easier to see, and obviously to engage with. So and again, this is not the case for all publishers, but it's very much part of the day-to-day partnership with the publisher to ensure that the content is as relevant as possible and it's what works with your audience. If we go to the next slide. So this shows the ad positions and viewability. What's key here is if you look at where the most time is spent on page. So the in-article unit, which would be normally that 50% the way down the page, in the middle, you'll find we've found really great results by running the likes of text units, which are, as obviously the users interact with the page going down, there's highly relevant contextual ads that they're able to engage with. And then as you see with the percentages, so 52 on the left-hand image, and then obviously 56 on the right-hand image, is where they spend most of their time. The highest performing unit generally across Dynamo would be where you see the 24% viewability. So that 4-image unit just below the article is where you get a really high engagement rate. The user's obviously gone through the site, read their article, and then there is something which catches their attention. It's relevant to what they're reading about. Oh, this makes sense. Let's have a look at what this is all about. It's not to say that some of the units we have, which are bottom of page, like on the right-hand image, where the 10% images. Still also works well, gets good engagement. It really does depend on the publisher and how the audience engages with the site. What is key is, from a publisher point of view with native at the moment, is publishers are asking for viewability stats. They want to know how well is the unit is performing for them, how much of the units that we're running are being seen, and by giving that information along with which advertisers are performing best, it really helps them to understand their own audience that additional bit more, which is an added value of obviously working with a partner, for instance, like Dynami. So that's where we obviously add some of the additional value, which is key in developing those partnerships in the long term. So if we go to the next slide, and then from our side, Cab's going to take over.
Thanks, Ross. So basically, we just wanted to give background, a little bit of the environment we're coming from. So Dynami is a native platform for business and finance. You can see an example on the screen of our units on Reuters. You can see what they look like. They're fairly clean. We've got a right rail integration and a below article integration examples there. And just to give you an idea of, we've showed you the ads, but this is kind of how they fit into the site. If you look at the next slide, these are the kind of publishers we work with in the space. So we know this space pretty well. If you look at the next slide, these are the kind of advertisers we work with. So again, we have experience working with advertisers. If you go to the next slide. Right, so the question came as part of the webinar, how do you retain high-quality customers, high-quality financial customers? And so we'd like to talk a little bit about that. Now, the keys to retaining customers, and I'd say most of our biggest customers are always on. So they're always on campaigns, and they are constantly optimizing. Or if they aren't always on, they're on from quarter to quarter. Even when you're working with it through an agency. So the keys to that are transparency and optimization. So we like to be completely transparent with our publishers and with our advertisers. So the advertiser can see where their ad is running. They can see how the different variants are doing. So in this example, we're looking at 2 variants of an ad, and it's being measured on a cost per action basis. And we will actually work with the advertisers directly to optimize and say, okay, well, this variant isn't working well. Let's turn that one off. And it's all about testing and basically optimizing to the metrics they use. So if you look at the next slide, these are all the kind of dimensions we optimize to. So I've talked about ad variants, but then there's source. And because of the different demographics with publishers, you'll have if it's a younger demographic for personal finance, like credit cards and loans, they'll be on a younger demographic site. If it's an older one for sort of retirement and investment, it'll be for an older demographic site. So there's source, including, but that could be for an advertiser, that could be social and search as well. I was really surprised. Time of day and day of week is really important and very, very important. The advertiser optimizes that. Of course, device. State also really important, and DMA. And then other things like age, gender, buyer power score, net assets, audience. Now the metrics you optimize to, of course, are different per advertiser. It could be a cost per action. It could be a branding campaign where you optimize the time on page or scroll rate, or maybe they're just optimizing to CTR. So it's really a matrix of, okay, here are all the dimensions we can optimize to, and here are all the, which metrics are the most important to you. And so if you look at the next slide, this is our last slide. Basically, in order to retain, high-paying, valuable clients, you have to take the metric that they are really concerned about and optimize it over time. So in this case, this is a client who is measuring their campaign performance by cost per action. And you can see over time here, which is a little over a year or so, we started out, testing constantly with variants and publishers, what have you. And the CPA was going up a bit, but then we were really able to take it down. And over time, we were able to keep that CPA really low. And basically, if you can optimize to the advertiser's metric and keep it really good for the advertiser, they're going to stick with you. They're just not going to leave you. And that's what we do. And so it's really native, in our opinion, is really about long-term relationships with publishers and long-term relationships with advertisers, and testing to optimize both of them. Because if you can optimize revenue for the publisher, they love it. And if you can really optimize those metrics for the advertiser, they love it. And what you get is a long-term synergistic relationship with all parties. And that's where we feel, programmatic, as Ross was saying, is more of a marketplace. It's more of, how much exposure can I get, and it's more of like trading in and out. You don't have a really solid, deep relationship with the players, whether it's the publisher or the advertiser. So that's where we feel native is different, and that's what we have.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Cable and Ross. Just a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions, you can submit them via the Q&A tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We'll be addressing all questions at the end of the presentations, but feel free to submit at any time. Next up, we have Phil Hawkland of Kiplinger. Phil?
What you just heard from Ross and Cable regarding native versus other approaches that you can go for advertising. I work with Kiplinger.com, and we did a major website redesign in the middle of 2016. And I really want to hit on a couple things about revenue generation, which I think is probably key for any publisher in the business, and really get that term of contextual relevance and how important that is in these efforts in terms of having successful experiences with your users. So you can go ahead and advance. Just a bit about us. This is kind of our site and our profile. We do about 3.5 unique monthly visitors to Kiplinger, 25 million page views a month. We skew older, and so we skew a little older and a little male. Our average age is 53, and so we talk about it, a lot of things that apply to people who are in that age demographic. We have an investment crowd, and we have a lot of folks who actually own securities of some type and are interested in how to maximize those and take advantage. We are a heavy U.S. audience, 98%, which is unique in that we really do know where our audience is coming from and what kind of issues they're turning to us to find. Investing, mutual funds, Social Security, tax reform, retirement, and robo-advisor. Those are our top terms that we find searches and what people come to us to find information about. Some quick numbers on our daily email and our print monthly magazine and our print newsletters. We are a 100-year-old company, and we come from a journalist and print DNA. We obviously have taken the website as part of the evolution of journalism and publishing, and that is now the biggest effort in our company. And I'm going to focus mostly on what we do in that space as we go. Okay, you can advance the slide. So with the website, of course, everyone's looking at how can we make money off of people who don't pay for content, and that I think is the challenge for most publishers these days. And most of the buckets where you can pull levers and generate revenue, I'm guessing are fairly well known, but the way we look at it is we're making most of our money off direct advertising, display, presentation for our direct clients that we work with and have a relationship with them or with the agency. Those are highly valued, but as has been mentioned, a lot of that is flipping into the programmatic networks and some of the more buys for audience rather than partnership with the site. And we do participate in some of those out of necessity and out of business trends. At the same time, we really try and focus with direct clients and build those relationships as possible, which leads us to native content placement. And we'll get more into that, but I think you've heard a little bit about this. Is something we have seen both from advertisers and people who use our website, that they are more likely to engage with this type of content. They're more likely to take it and benefit from it. And we have found that this is a fairly good way and a less intrusive way to commercially interact with our audience. We also use some widgetry and tools, lead generation type things where we're connecting our audience directly with businesses who can answer their need. And then we are into the affiliate links as possible to be able to drive people to purchase products. And then we, of course, are trying to sell many of our Kiplinger products and newsletters and magazines and print materials at this time that we're trying to engage our audience to go deeper with us and see our information that way. Okay, you can advance the slide. We are facing challenges. I think probably a lot of these are things that everybody is addressing in one way or another. Advertising revenue is under attack by ad blockers that are either built into browsers now or that people have installed themselves. so they can enjoy our content without paying for it and without dealing with advertising so that we can monetize it. It's real, and I don't think it's probably going away. And with advertisers and viewability requirements and first-party data and wanting to be able to understand who is looking at my ad, not just how many times does it serve, and being able to quantify and show our advertisers we are reaching the right audience and the desired demographic you want to reach, and they're asking publishers to be more concerned about delivering the right kinds of audiences, not just impressions. Then we get into distributed content delivery, and we have experienced this one probably the most over the past couple of years, where a lot of people are engaging with our content but not on our site. They might read it on Facebook or on Apple News or on other distributed services where people are getting their information. And in most cases, that's being displayed without our advertising and without our ability to monetize it. And our hope is that by appearing in Apple News or Facebook, that people will click on a link and come to our site. But this is getting more and more difficult as those platforms also want to keep people on their site. Advertisers expect a lot. They have options. They have ways that they can reach and test on lots of sites with programmatic, and that all leads to dropping direct CPMs, more publishers in the game trying to compete with us, and so it's a good time to be a publisher if you're into change and dramatic revolution in how things are done. Let's go ahead and move forward. So in September of 2016, we launched a new version of our website with a goal of cleaning it up. We had gotten to a point where we had a lot of junk on the page. And while I can't say we still don't have some of that, we do, but I think we have come a long way in terms of cleaning up where we went. At the time, we were working with 7 different native content and content recommendation type companies and services, and we had positions on our site in various sections or various content types that had 7 different companies with units serving into our site. It was complicated, it was confusing, it was a lot of hands in the kitchen, and as mentioned previously, it was less of a partnership and more of a straight business relationship. And so as we started looking toward the redesign of our site and trying to operate things a little bit more effectively, we started having conversations with one of our better partners in this space, and which is Dionomy. And we talked about how we could potentially work out a deal where we could, let's work with one because they have the right things to put in front of our audience, and see if we can't work out a business deal that makes sense for all of us. And I'll get into the fact that I think we did just that. Go ahead and advance. This is our old site. This is what our site looked like in September of 2016. We had a very small piece of content up top, and then we separated it with a whole bunch of different units. I'm not even talking about the banner ads and the advertising, only the native content in this example. We have a 5-unit image strip from Outbrain. We've got a stack of our internal links along with NetSeer internal links, along with Outbrain internal links. And in those, just go right across there, we're offering about 25 different links just in that little area right there. We have How Life Works. We've got all kinds of different stuff, and then one of them happens to be the original Dionomy placement that we only placed at the bottom of our slideshows with investing content. So we started with a very small profile with Dionomy, and the reason that we started dialing in on that is Dionomy in our investing content was outperforming everybody else fairly consistently when we didn't feel like there was a big differentiation between how they were being presented. But the content and the context of what those links were speaking to our audience, and we were seeing better performance. So we then moved to a redesign. And go ahead and flip the slide. And we came more like this, where we worked only with Dionomy. We took our partners from 7 to 1. And we have some of the same style of units where we do have the right rail 5 headline text unit, which provides some native spaces there. But the one that is the best is the 2 text headline unit. And it's just 2 simple links right underneath our content before we get to the slideshow navigation. And that little 2-line unit right there has become incredibly effective space for both the advertisers that are in there and for us as a way that we can help generate revenue from our site. the other thing with the one underneath that with the 4-image unit, it's not only something where we use that as a kind of a, let's call it a page end. In article placements for us, we also decided to use that as a visual separator. And we started trying to put articles, when you click into one of our articles, we give you a finite scroll. So it's not a continuous scroll where you keep getting article after article, but we put 3 articles together, and we use that Dionomy 4-image unit as a visual separator. And as people start using our site, they very quickly get familiar with that and see how it works. And we have found that, yes, it's also a source of links and a source of way to provide information, but it's also a way to help our user keep their mind at where they are on the site and kind of how they're working through the page. All right, so let's move ahead. So let's talk about the money, because this is kind of where it really comes together. In 2015, we had about 305,000 from our 7 partners. In 2016, we had things changing, but you can see that things were ticking up, and I can tell you that the 3rd and 4th quarter where a lot of that difference comes from. You can see that we more than doubled our revenues in this effort from 2015 to 2017, and we are on a pretty solid pace for, without a lot of stress that we're going to do much better than that this year. We're doing this off of not growing our traffic, and I think this is one of the key pieces that people sometimes are struggling with. We have done about between 25 and 30 million page views a month since the early part of 2015. We are actually doing a little bit less direct traffic today than we were then. And the reasons for that are many. I've mentioned some of them around the industry forces, where a lot of our content is now consumed on other people's sites. A lot of people are reading our content in email and maybe not actually clicking through to the site. So in addition to the revenue growth that we were able to see kind of in positioning these things correctly, in streamlining the number of units and how we use them and incorporating them into our design, all of those things I think have led to the picture you hope to see, which is increased profit and revenue. Okay, we can go ahead and move ahead. So why does it work? And I want to put it in bold, and I think you've heard it a number of times, but this is the key piece. It's contextual relevance. Give people an ad or a native placement or a link that is relevant to what they are, who they are, and what they may be looking for. We've worked with a number of other native content networks, and not everybody embraces this. A lot of this is about what will people click on, and that is very different than what is relevant to them that will also get them to click on. There are a lot of salacious things and other ads that might draw attention visually, but that is not the impression or the style that we want to give to our audience. We want them to feel like they're getting trusted, actionable financial advice, and we feel like we're working with Dionomy as a partner is a way that we can do that. Granted, it works, I think, largely because our audience is a little bit older. They land on Kiplinger because they know what they're looking for. They're looking for personal financial advice or guidance or questions about an issue, about taxes or retirement or investing. And we write a lot about that, but then we're also able to give them information and more resources for them to take action on those questions. And then lastly is presenting the ad or the information in a familiar way. And I guess, I look at it as if you're throwing out a banner ad, you're just throwing it out to everybody and hoping people take a look. Whereas native is you've identified what the issue is you're trying to deliver, and you're placing it right in front of the person who is most likely to need it. And that, to me, is more of the rifle shot approach, where you can dial in the audience, dial in the relevance of the message, and put it right in front of them at the right time. I think that gets us to where everybody hopes to be at the end of the day in this effort. Okay. You can go ahead and advance the slide. We think a lot about how we can grow this and how we can build this together. I mentioned that the 2-line headline unit is performing very well, and we continually evaluate which units are working for the user. We do a lot of A/B testing as well, and we try to figure out if there's other things that we could try and replicate, or if there's other differences we can do. We're comfortable with where we are at the moment, but we will continue to iterate and try to find other ways to do it. We are obviously now getting approached by some of our direct advertisers about, hey, how do I get in that stack of links, and how do I get things like that? And hopefully we're able to work with Dionomy to build those relationships and to integrate some folks into those things. And then, of course, I've mentioned a number of times, with the distributed content, when people are reading our content off of our site, the ability for us to be able to embed links or be able to embed native content into those pieces is something that I hope to work with everyone on in the future. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, that's fine. So that's me. There's my contact info. I would feel free to reach out to you if you have questions or you have an idea. And thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. And we're very happy with where we've landed.
All right, Phil, thank you very much. Folks, at this point, we're going to open it up for Q&A. As mentioned, you can submit your questions via the Q&A tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Go ahead and type in your question and address that to all. We have a question for Phil. What is your CPM for ads on your site?
Well, it's a little bit varied, of course, because we've got a lot of direct deals where the CPMs are going to be a little bit higher. We're going to probably give them a little bit more presence for those. We also have lower units on the page, which we do use programmatic networks for, and those can get not very valuable. Those can get be a buck. But we also have several pages that are placements that are going to be over $20 CPM, are going to be approaching $50 CPMs in some cases. We're also doing a lot more sponsorship type sales where we're sponsoring email, we're sponsoring topic areas where we're measuring it less on a CPM prior, we're doing it more on presence and deliverability. We'll see if that is a trend that continues, but CPMs as a measure I think are tough these days with advertisers wanting to more than just a shout out. They want to know, did I reach the right person? Who is he? Do I have his email address? I only seen that kind of continuing as we go forward. Okay, terrific. Phil, can you talk a little bit about the performance metrics that you're assigning to this and that you're sharing with advertisers? Dianomi made an interesting point earlier in the presentation about arriving on the right type of metric for the advertisers. What sort of, considering that you've grown revenue so significantly while traffic is down a bit for a variety of different reasons, as you mentioned, what sort of performance metrics are you really sharing with advertisers? Well, and really, we're trying to, we do share CPMs, and we kind of show them the top line metrics of, look, you're going to reach this kind of people, you're going to reach, we'll be able to guarantee certain level of impressions as it would be. But then at the same time, we try to really dial the conversation into what is the result? Are you getting the leads that you expect? Are you getting the the sign-ups for whatever program you might be mentioning, or are you meeting the right kinds of customer? And I think, especially in financial world, it's not always about 1,000 people responding to the ad. It's about the 10 who respond, who've got the right kind of portfolio and the right kind of balance, who take the action and engage with it. And I think, again, back to contextual relevance, and I keep saying that, but if you're putting that message there, it's going to enable success. And I think what we've seen, at least from the advertisers we work with directly, as well as the partners that we're working with, like Dianomi, that the better placed we can put things, the more relevant placement that they see that message. I think that's really what we try and measure. And we look at the raw numbers of, well, how many people actually clicked that link and how many people actually scrolled down that far to see that strip. And we look at those things. We use those a lot as just, baseline and ballpark metrics to kind of guide some thinking, but we're also not going to overly sweat day-to-day fluctuations in those kinds of things. So try to use a lot of that as guideposts for strategic thinking.
Okay, excellent. Folks, just a reminder, if you have a question, submit it via the Q&A tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Phil, can you talk a little bit about what the success of this program has meant for your dedicated sales staff? What does this mean for them doing things differently? Native is a different type of sale. Have they had to change what they're doing as far as their daily interaction with advertisers?
I think definitely, and that's a great piece. When you have your ad sales team, let's call it over the past decade and change in terms of the internet kind of came to pass, is really an agency business, and it's really a fairly buy, sell, take an order kind of business, and then you either deliver the impressions or you do not, and you sell based on those things. As native content kind of becomes more of a proven way that advertisers can get their message to the right people, we are, I think, in a very nice position where we can quantify who it is, or qualify and quantify who we have and what kinds of people it is that are reading our content. When we sell advertising to native advertising to clients, it's a much more involved sale. It's not the same as taking an order. It's much more of, we've got some creative to develop. We've got whatever it might be, an article that has to be loaded into our CMS. We're going to have to put a click tracker on it to make sure that we're delivering the right number of clicks. If we aren't delivering enough clicks, how do we get it in front of more people? What levers can you pull? And we are having a lot of those discussions. I mean, I think the sales process with the client is hopefully a relationship building activity, and allows you to build a tighter bond with the people who are paying the bills, and at the same time, hopefully giving more control to the publishers in that they're not dependent upon networks to deliver them clients. They can go and talk to these folks directly, work out strategic deals that may make sense. And I hope we can look at it as an opportunity. I think banner, just the straight banner stuff is going to be there because it's branding and it needs to be there. But I hope that in the evolution of technology and how people consume information from publishers, that we're going to see advertisers being more thoughtful about how they present their message to get the result they want.
Okay, excellent. We've got a question that's come in. I'd like to throw it out to both Dinomi and Phil if you'd like to address it. And the question is, what are your plans for GDPR and tracking issues? I'm sure most of us are familiar with GDPR at this point. Massive data privacy initiative that goes into effect next month regarding businesses doing any type of business with individuals who reside in the EU. So I'll just open that up to both Dinomi and Kiplinger. What are your plans for GDPR and tracking issues?
Dinomi, I'm letting you guys go first because this is much more of an on the front burner European issue than it is for the United States. We have it as well, but I think you guys are probably dealing with this on a day-to-day basis more so than I am.
Sure, and I'll let Ross jump in here. Just start out to say you're quite right. Dinomi first out in London, although most of our business is in the U.S. now. And just for the audience, U.S. businesses who do market to EU citizens do need to worry about GDPR. And actually, we're seeing with a lot of our advertisers and some publishers are coming to us basically heeding GDPR. So it could be that you only market to a small number of EU citizens, but your advertisers are coming to you saying, hey, but you need to play by GDPR. So yeah, we're definitely finalizing our GDPR and for the audience, the deadline is May 25th, so it's right around the corner. Initially, it deals with consent initially. So you have to change all of your email marketing. And I think a lot of the publishers, part of the webinar right now, they're going to have email databases, and you're going to have to, if you have any people in your database, which you probably do, who are in the EU, you're going to have to think about the consent issues, where consent has to be freely given. You can't, in the old way, you'd have an opt-in box that's pre-ticked. That's not. It's not really acceptable anymore. So you have to, and also when people opt in, they have to know specifically what they're opting into. Probably opt-in has to be more specific than it was in the old days. And of course, there's also the whole privacy issues and user tracking issues. So that was more about email, but if you're running any kind of user tracking, like DMP user tracking, that changes a lot. So, for example, an IP address is now considered personally identifiable information. Now, it's very complicated because with an IP address, it depends how you use it. So, for example, you can look at an IP address just to determine where the user is. And you kind of have to do that because you have to know whether he's in the EU or not outside the EU. And you have to do that anyway because you have to target your ads based on the country because different countries have different rules. So that's part of it. But let's say that you store that IP address and you use that to profile the user. Now you've reached a line here because you're storing information on users without their consent. So GDPR, obviously, it's a huge issue in Europe. It's changing, really. It's changing the digital space. It's less of an issue in the U.S., but it's definitely something that needs to be heated. And I'll see if, Ross, do you want to add to that? Or
So I don't have too much to add other than from our side, we've also been working on this for a long time, knowing obviously when the deadline is late this month. So from our side, we've taken all the actions required to ensure that by that point that we're fully compliant and we can continue business as usual, which is obviously key for the publishers and advertisers we work with alike.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And actually, we in Europe, we don't do the things that kind of cross the line, or that most of our advertising is sort of contextual. We're not targeting audiences in Europe, so that wasn't a big issue for us. We do target audiences in the U.S., and if the U.S. adopted GDPR, which I don't think they will, but if they did, that would be more significant. But yeah, it's pretty much business as usual. But just for the audience, yes, GDPR is something to learn about because it'll affect the digital space.
All right, good. Folks, we are winding down here. If you do have a question, please submit it now via the Q&A tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. I'd just like to ask both Dinomi and Phil whether this can really, what you're doing, does this get back to more of a recurring revenue type model of advertising? Recurring revenue, that's something a lot of publishers are looking for right now, mostly because advertising has really moved away from that. Your 12 times buy has gone down to quarterly buys or monthly buys, and it's tough to sell in and sell out. Does this type of relationship with the advertiser and the relationship between Kipler and Dinomi start to get you back to more of a recurring revenue type sale?
Yeah, I'd say so, definitely. So from year to year, we only lose 5% of our top 40 advertisers. But I'd be interested in Phil's view as well. I'd say definitely yes.
No, I echo that completely. It's really beneficial, and it goes back to that partnership discussion that goes, in the Dinomi presentation, where you can be a little bit more strategic, but the revenue piece of it, just purely from a business standpoint, is more predictable. It's somewhat traffic based, but it's a little bit more predictable in terms of you kind of have an idea of the percentages of people that are going to engage. It can vary from month to month. All of a sudden there's some really great content that people are engaging with more than maybe it's a little better month than the rest. But for the most part, it's a more predictable process in terms of revenue.
All right, terrific. Well, with that concludes the presentation. I'd like to thank our speakers, Phil Hawken at Kiplinger, and also Cable and Ross from Dinomi. You can see Phil's contact information on the slide here if you'd like to follow up directly with him, and we'll be providing contact information for Dinomi as well as an archive of this presentation. Thanks again for joining us. Have a good afternoon.